welcome to this deep dive. We're getting into a really specific but pretty important corner of U.S. patent law today.
That's right. We're focusing on the MPEP, the Manual of Patent Examining Procedure.
And this is part of our, ongoing series where we try to make this dense material a bit more accessible, section by section.
Today it's Chapter 2100, Patentability, and specifically Section 2115.
Section 2115, material or article worked upon by apparatus. Sounds technical, but the core idea is kind of surprising.
It really is. It tackles this principle that, well, the actual stuff a machine works on usually isn't the key factor in deciding if the machine itself is patentable.
Which does feel a bit counterintuitive, doesn't it? You'd think what a machine does to something specific like hair or concrete would be central.
You would think so. But Section 2115 often says, not so fast. Unless that material actually forces a real structural difference in the machine, it doesn't typically carry patentable weight for the apparatus claim itself.
Okay, so let's unpack that. What's the fundamental principle Section 2115 is laying out?
The core idea is this. When you're looking at an apparatus claim, a claim for a physical device, a machine, its patentability hinges mostly on its structure.
Its physical bits and pieces, how it's built.
Exactly. The specific material it's meant to work on, that's usually considered secondary in the patentability analysis for the machine claim.
So why this focus? Why structure over the material it interacts with? What's the logic?
Well, it boils down to what the patent system is trying to reward, which is, the inventiveness in the machine's design.
Yeah.
So unless working with, say, wet clay requires a fundamentally new and non-obvious structural feature in the machine compared to one working with dry sand, just stating the intended material doesn't make the machine itself inventive. They're looking at the machine's inherent characteristics.
Right, and this isn't just theory. Section 2115 is built on actual court cases. Let's maybe start with in re Otto. What does that one tell us?
Okay, in re Otto, this case involved claims for a core member for hair curlers.
Okay, sounds pretty specific to hair.
It does. And you might assume, naturally, that since it's for curling hair, its patentability would be tied up with, well, hair.
Makes sense. The function seems key.
But the court actually found the claims unpatentable based on that reasoning. The critical point was that the claim was for the device, the core member itself, not a method of curling hair.
Ah, the claim type matters.
Hugely. So features that were only relevant because of the hair, the material being worked on, couldn't make the apparatus itself patentable. The invention needed to be in the structure of the core member.
So the lesson from Otto is, you can't just say, it's for hair and expect that to make the device patentable.
Pretty much. The intended use is context, sure, but unless that use demands a structurally novel or non-obvious part in the device, it doesn't add patentable weight to the apparatus claim.
Got it. Okay, let's shift to another case mentioned, In re Young. This one involved a concrete beam forming machine. Again, sounds very specific.
It does. And in Young, the applicant actually tried to include the final product, the concrete beam, within the apparatus claim for the machine that makes it.
Sort of saying, this machine's defined by the specific beam it produces.
Kind of, yeah. But the court pushed back on that. They ruled that simply reciting the product in the apparatus claim doesn't automatically make the machine claim patentable.
Why not?
Because fundamentally, a machine is judged by what it is structurally, not just by what it makes. Think of it like, well, a cookie cutter. The cutter's patentability is in its shape or mechanism, not just the fact it makes star-shaped cookies.
Unless making that specific star shape required a totally new kind of cutting-edge structure.
Exactly. So, in Young, unless the properties of the concrete beam necessitated a unique structural feature in the forming machine itself, the beam's characteristics didn't save the machine claim.
That's a clear distinction. It's about the machine's guts, not just its output. Like a bread machine, the invention is in how it kneads or bakes, not just that it produces a tasty loaf.
That's a perfect analogy. The output is the result, but the patentability of the apparatus claim focuses on that underlying structure.
Okay, and then there's In re Casey. This one seems to really hammer the point home with the taping machine. What was the situation there?
Right, Casey is quite illustrative. The invention claimed was a machine for applying tape. It had features like a special brush surface for the adhesive tape and a mechanism for moving it.
Sounds straightforward enough.
But the examiner rejected it based on prior art for a perforating machine.
A perforating machine.
Right.
Like for making holes in paper. That seems completely different. Different material, different function.
Totally different application. But the court agreed with the examiner. They looked past the intended use tape versus paper sheets and focused on the structure.
And found them similar.
They found the claim structure of the taping machine was fundamentally similar or obvious in light of the existing perforating machine structure. The court explicitly said, and this is key, the manner or method in which such machine is to be utilized is not germane to the issue of patentability of the machine itself.
Wow. So even though one deals with sticky tape and the other with making holes, because the core mechanics were deemed similar?
The intended material and function didn't confer patentability onto the apparatus claim. It really forces you to isolate the structural invention.
Okay, so summing up this guiding principle from Otto, Young, and Casey. For an apparatus claim, you're really judged on the nuts and bolts, the physical design. The material it's supposed to work on is mostly just background info.
That's a good way to put it. Context, yes. Basis for novelty or non-obviousness on its own. Usually no.
But there's always an unlet. Right. What's the exception here? When does the material matter for the apparatus claim?
The exception kicks in when the novelty or the very utility of the device fundamentally depends on its interaction with that specific material. And this is crucial, that dependence is reflected in structural limitations in the claim itself.
Meaning it has to be built differently because of the material.
Precisely. You can't just say designed for handling Fragile X. The claim needs to spell out the specific physical features like unique padded grippers or a special low-friction surface that exists because Fragile X requires them. It has to be baked into the structure described in the claim.
So the material has to force a structural adaptation that's then claimed.
Exactly. It's not enough to just state the function or intended material. The claim language needs to capture those structural necessities.
And just for clarity, this whole line of thinking applies specifically to apparatus claims.
Yes, that's very important. Section 2115 is about claims directed to machinery, to physical devices. It doesn't necessarily apply the same way to method claims, claims about a process, or other types of claims like composition claims.
Okay, so wrapping this specific section up, MPEP 2115 draws a pretty clear line. For apparatus claims, it's structure, structure, structure. The material worked on is usually just context, unless it fundamentally dictates novel structural features that are actually claimed.
That's the essence of it. It really underscores the need to focus on the tangible, physical aspects of the invention when you're claiming a machine or device.
Understanding this is, well, pretty crucial if you're drafting or prosecuting patent applications for machines. This deep dive, part of our MPEP audio summary series, hopefully makes Section 2115 a bit clearer for you.
Absolutely. And remember, for the definitive word, always go back to the official MPEP text or consult with a qualified patent practitioner.
Definitely. This is meant to be an accessible overview. Thanks again to Mike Shepard for making this series happen. We appreciate his vision.
And what's interesting, just as a final thought, is how this principle really pushes inventors and their attorneys to think hard about what truly makes their machines structurally different and inventive, rather than just relying on its cool application.
That's a great point. It forces a focus on the core innovation. So thank you for joining us for this look into MPEP 2115. Here's something to ponder. If the material doesn't usually confer patentability to the apparatus, how might you strategically use method claims alongside apparatus claims to fully protect an invention that relies heavily on interacting with a specific material? Worth thinking about.